Hello, BookTube. This is in the way of the BookTube Parasite Tag, which was a great general open-ended tag created by Sean the Book Maniac over on his channel. I'll try to remember to leave a link down below. As a way for one booktuber to piggyback content onto the content of another booktuber with the aim of mocking that booktuber's shoes and hairstyle. But I thought that I would adapt the BookTube Parasite Tag to talk about content instead of physical appearance. And I want to do it in response to yet another tag. Curtis and Conor over on Curtis' channel, again, I'll try and link it down below, did the Intimidating TBR Tag. I don't remember who created that tag, but it's all about the books that are on your enormous amorphous shelf of stuff to read and what categories they fall under. And at the end of a long, rambling discussion, Conor didn't so much tag me in the Intimidating TBR Tag. You don't really tag a lion on the African plain on the Intimidating Gazelle Tag, now do you? Books don't intimidate me. If I'm doing my job right, I intimidate them. But instead, he gave me a broader challenge, which was to expostulate on every single book mentioned in their video. It's almost like I have a reputation or something, but I'm going to take the challenge, and we'll start right away. Although, boy, BookTube, I have to tell you, I felt right at home in their video. Not just because they're a welcoming pair to talk about books, but also because I have been in rooms like that, the undergraduate rooms of young men with their book collections, and they're just starting out in the lifelong adventure of reading. I have been in those rooms. Oh, I feel at home in those rooms. Challenging the content, shaping it, questioning it, talking about it. Oh, what I wouldn't give to be able to snap my fingers and just show up in that room some Friday night and talk about all of the books instead of just a handful. And by the same token, what they wouldn't give to make sure I'm not able to do that. But anyway, the first two books mentioned were, let's see here, Curtis said that he hasn't finished Wolf Hall or Matthew Annard's Zone, and Conor said he hasn't finished Infinite Jest. And my response to those is that Zone is not worth reading, and neither is Infinite Jest. Infinite Jest is an enormous amount of work to read, and there is no payoff. It is not just an unworked original draft of a story. It's 20 unworked drafts of 20 slightly different original stories, and the unworked drafts are not what you normally think of as unworked drafts. They are simple diarrhea. Just anything that came to the author's mind on the page. Utterly worthless to read, either in whole or in part. But Wolf Hall and its sequel, Bring Up the Bodies, very much worth your time. I'm not really sure what's wrong with Curtis, just in the general sense, but also I'm not really sure what's wrong with him, what's wrong with anyone who could start Wolf Hall and not keep reading it. This is a thing that's sold 1 million copies to a lot of people who are not brushed up on Tudor fiction and Tudor history, and it's worked. So I just am in a bad moment. I would try it again. It's well worth your time. Oh my. Then the next pair of books that came up were David Noakes' biography of Jane Austen and Donna Tartt's novel, The Secret History. And The Secret History is of course, it was her breakout debut. It changed her life and the life of the terrain of the reading world in modern era for good or ill. It's very much worth reading. It suffers from all of the same things that you all have heard me rail on the made-up stories about on this channel for 2 years now, which is that all of the characters in the novel The Secret History know that they're in a novel. And unlike them and all of their counterparts in virtually every other novel that I've ever read in my entire flippin' life, normal people don't know that they're in novels because normal people are not in novels. So if you're writing a novel that already has an incredibly outre setting, an incredibly outrageous premise, an incredibly outrageous series of plot twists, and in addition to all that, your characters know they're in a novel and are just mugging for the camera the whole time, then what is the point? Then what is the point? So much contemporary fiction does that. What is the point of that? if you have closed the circle, if you've closed the loop, so that not only is everything in your book completely unbelievable. So Nina is a clerk at a store, and she has a bunch of quippy things to say about her customers, and then she decides that the thing to do really is to pursue love in a research station in Antarctica. And okay, so I guess I'll just go do that. And you're reading the book and you're saying, okay, well, as an author, you have told me about Nina, and there's no possible way that she could afford to do that. What's she going to live on for money? There's no possible way that she would even know how to do that. No, she does it because she's a character in a novel, and characters in novels can do anything. And what's the point? If that's what you're going to do, what's the point? I understand putting people in novels, and then having things happen to those people. But who cares what happens to characters in novels? If you know what I mean. I'm not really making that very clear. But, I mean, you will enjoy The Secret History, but the 50-cent word is verisimilitude, and there isn't a single scrap of it anywhere. And not only in in The Secret History, but in anything that Donna Tartt has ever written, or ever will likely write. And in her case, I might be willing to grant it, because I don't think she knows any real people. She's certainly never been a real person herself, not at any point in her entire life. So it's possible that she's obeying the old writing school formula of writing what she knows. But most novelists don't have that excuse. They just want to do this weird kabuki theater on the page. But what was the other one? Oh, David Noakes' Jane Austen biography is decidedly snoozy. It is decidedly not the best Jane Austen book you can read. Claire Tomlin's book is fantastic. David Cecil's book is fantastic. But David Noakes, we don't know nearly as much about Jane Austen as we wish we did. We don't have nearly as many. It's a terrible shame that so many original documents were destroyed. But still, better books can be done on her than his. I'm a fan of his work just in general, but I would not bother with his biography of Jane Austen. Find a better one. Happy to send you a better one. Or if I lived up the lane and you couldn't get rid of me, I would simply do what I've done to a million young men in a million rooms like that, with a million makeshift libraries like that, and simply supply the books. That was always my dictum. When I do still have access to similar rooms, but unfortunately my current crop of young men do not read. They bench press instead. I'm getting I don't know, it's a hazardous guess, but I'll go out on a limb and say that precious little bench pressing has been done by either Conan or Curtis. But the young men that I know now don't have any books in their room. They're PlayStations. But it used to be, my dictum was, go the whole 9 yards. You love hanging out with young people. They like hanging out with you, so that element of it is not weird. I'm not old, which is nice. I mean, I'm old, chronologically speaking. If you were to count my rings, if you were to radiocarbon date me, yes. But not when it comes to conversation. Not when it comes to knowing me. Then there's absolutely no difference at all. There never has been, and I hope there never will be. I know so many people my own age and younger who are so old. Oh my God, nothing at all there for young people to connect with at all. No connection whatsoever. None, not only none possible, but none wanted. Whereas here on the street where I live, on the first of the month, 1 million students moved in. And thanks to the fact that I have an unbelievably outgoing dog, I've met them all now. Been invited to their apartments, walked around with them, talked books with them, talked politics with them, without any hint at all. No thought ever crossed their mind, isn't it odd that I'm doing this with such an old person? Because that nobody ever thinks that way. And when I had access to rooms like that of readers, I always told myself, don't just preach. Convert. Don't just admonish. Provide counterexamples. So don't say, look at this, you have all this Murakami, but Murakami is writing in a literary tradition, and he's the latest and the least exponent of it. You have all this Murakami, but you don't have any Mishima, you don't have any Tanizaki, you don't have Tale of Genji, and I made it my point back when I for instance, lived in university towns and went out a lot more than I do. I made a point of not only saying that, but providing the books. And I would, oh my God, if you're interested in reading a biography of Jane Austen, there are better biographies. And I bet a quick tour of the charity shops in your ambit would find a better one. Although, I should point out, as long as I'm in full spleen, that the time to read a Jane Austen biography is after you have not only read but reread every one of her novels. Okay? Because it really gets Steve's goat when somebody's reading the David Noakes biography of Jane Austen who hasn't read Pride and Flippin' Prejudice. Okay? Alright, let's move on. I think the next question involved sequels. And there were 4 books that came up. Kudos by Rachel Cusk, which is not worth your time to read. Nevermind by Edward St. Aubyn, which I gather from the video Curtis has read many times. Edward St. Aubyn is incredible. He's fantastic. Any of his books are, except except his Shakespeare takeoff for the Hogarth Shakespeare series, which somehow didn't do it for me. I have the paperback, and I'm gonna reread it and see if maybe I missed it the first time. But I don't think so, because I pay close attention to the Hogarth Shakespeare series now because it's been so good. And his entry for that series, I thought it fell flat. That might make sense, because in many cases where I have seen successes in the Hogarth Shakespeare series, they have come from authors who in their previous books showed, at least to my mind, a decided weakness when it comes to plot and structure. And all of a sudden, when you give them a Shakespeare play, in other words, when you hand them plot and structure, they are freed from their main weakness, and it allows their strengths to show much greater, whereas Edward St. Aubyn doesn't have any weaknesses as an author. So handing him a plot and a structure might actually have hurt his writing. That's the only explanation I come up with. Then the other 2 are Crudo by Olivia Lang, which has some good parts, but there's a lot more you could read before you get to it, including the last one, which is the Gormenghast books by Mervyn Peake. I thought it was absolutely hilarious in the video. Connor held up a box set of Penguin paperbacks from the 1960s, and the 2 of them were looking at it like it was some sort of archaeological exhibit from Raiders of the Lost Ark, saying, 1980s? I think this was the 1980s. Like the 1980s and the 1990s are already so long ago that they might as well be forever ago. if the 60s, the 1930s, the 1980s, what difference does it make? But Gormenghast is enormously worth your time. It kills me that Gormenghast is not better read today. I can only attribute that to the fact that in America, and I think in the UK as well, if you walk into a bookstore, you won't see it. What we really need, and I know you're going to see this coming, is a big fat Penguin 1 volume of the 3 Gormenghast books. That would be great. Just a big book called Gormenghast. Maybe someday. And maybe there is a collection like that I don't know about. But if there is, it doesn't have wide distribution. There's no wide distribution Gormenghast. And that's a shame. Because it's a masterwork of 20th century fantasy fiction. Then what do we have here next? New books that our recipients haven't read. One was The Long Take by Robin Robertson, which I read. It was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize. It's unusual. It has long sing-songy stretches of poetry, and it's a weird debut. I thought it was extremely assured as a debut. The litmus test here is one that very few books pass. I liked it, and so did Britta. And that's if you were to assemble the 10 widest read and most opinionated booktubers, I'd be willing to bet. I mean, I think I don't think I'm being overly egotistical to say that both I and Britta would be on that list. And I think I have often believed that if you made a list of those 10 booktubers and then made a list of books in a given calendar year that they all like, then that's the BookTube Book Awards right there. That's a trickier award to get than any that I know of. Imagine that. But Britta and I both liked it. So you're probably in good hands to get that off your new list. And then another book very similar was Benjamin Markowitz's A Weekend in New York, which I liked, and so did Eric Carl Anderson. So and he would be on that list of booktubers. So you're in pretty good shape with both of those. Although watching that answer to this question made me endlessly curious. And one of the main things I did in undergraduate boys' rooms like that was to pepper with questions, just a million questions. Like, for instance, what's your financial status like? What's your state when you're getting new books? Do you go out and buy new books? Does it cause physical pain? Do you have to ration from elsewhere and the money that you spend, if you spend it there? I think that's fascinating. Just endlessly interesting. Whereas you can't ask somebody my own age or, 20 years younger. You can't ask. There's a whole long list of questions that you can't ask them. You can't. This corset of social restrictions has snugly been snatched into place, and all of a sudden there are a million things you can't talk about. Very boring. Oh my God. But anyway, the Long Take and Weekend in New York are both good, but if money is at all an issue, I'd stick to your charity shops, because there are a ton of things that you can find that are every bit as good or better. On new books are so expensive. But anyway, the next one, the next books that came up were Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy and the novels of Anita Brookner, and also the novels of Roy Jacobson. And the reason why Conor mentioned that he read a Roy Jacobson and he thought there's not really anything there. I felt like it was gas. Nothing really happened. And he, I think, briefly mentioned that it might have been that it was a work in translation. I'm here to tell you, they're all like that. And if a translator can do that, then that translator should have been fired. And instead, everyone who can read Jacobson in the original read all of those translations. Nobody had a problem with it. That's my foremost indication that the writer has no there. Once again, Curtis bashed Anita Brookner's Hotel du Lac as incredibly boring, and wondered if maybe her other books might be better. I tend to like Anita Brookner. I tend to like her novels. She is very, very decidedly a C-list author. Don't let anyone try to tell you otherwise. She is a very comfortable, not very challenging author who came up with one or two good ideas and just worked them into a completely by-the-numbers novel. Very intelligently done, but there's nothing that will unseat you. There's nothing that will stick with you. So, actually, now that I think about it, Hotel du Lac is probably a good litmus test. If you read that book and you didn't like it, then I can't think of any reason why you would read the rest of Anita Brookner. And unlike in some other cases in this little list here, there isn't any particular reading need. If Anita Brookner doesn't strike you well, then you can safely skip Anita Brookner, unlike Wolf Hall. If Wolf Hall doesn't strike you right, then figure out how to get it to strike you right. And what can I say about Blood Meridian that I haven't already said? It's garbage. I would say it's self-evident garbage, but a lot of smart people don't seem to see it. This is a kind of writing that we refer to here on BookTube as Dude Bro Lit, and it is not. It's not even a question of Blood Meridian being a bad novel. Blood Meridian, most of the rest of what Cormac McCarthy wrote, and most of the rest of Dude Bro Lit isn't even fiction. It's something completely, when you turn the pages of it, you're not actually reading, which happens with this part of your brain. Instead, you're doing something with your limbic system to get dopamine hits. It isn't actually even reading. The imaginative connection with the words on the page, the extrapolation of the written world that you're encountering to the normal world, the mapping over of those two worlds, the appreciation of rhetoric and syntax and the beauty of language and the inventiveness of imagery, all the stuff that happens here, all the stuff that is reading, does not happen in Dude Bro Lit. And Cormac McCarthy is the foremost living exponent of Dude Bro Lit. Instead, something happens back here that is much more akin. If you hook up electrodes to people and follow them, all the parts of the brain that light up during video games light up during Dude Bro Lit. They don't light up during Jane Austen. And believe you me, the authors of Dude Bro Lit know that. As far as I'm concerned, if you are going to gravitate towards a certain type of fiction because it doesn't feel like reading, then maybe reading isn't for you. And if you think reading is for you, then dispense with it completely and get into the deep end of the pool. But who was the other one? Oh, no, that was it. It was those three. And then we move on to the next one, which is books that you're just not in the mood to read or to finish. All throughout, hanging over this whole tag of Conor and Curtis was this whole blight of mood reading. I just we have begun to move the conversation on BookTube 2.0. We have begun to move the conversation away from Sparkling Fairy Lights and all YA, all the time, read uncritically, solely in terms of which of the characters you would want to go to the prom with. That was, for a long time, almost all of BookTube. We are slowly moving the conversation so that BookTube is now about a whole bunch of other things. Okay, that's great. Next target on Steve's agenda is this incredible prevalence of mood reading, where I'll just go wherever I feel like, I don't know, as if reading weren't a discipline. As if it weren't a thing. No one's ever heard of mood walking. No one's ever heard of mood running. I don't so much mind if you let mood pick what you feel like reading next. Even I do that, where you look at your shelves and you think, you know, I just read 2 adventure stories, or in my case, 4 books on the Holocaust. I feel like a giant shark novel. Okay, that's fine. But that isn't completely mood-driven. There are tumblers in place there. There are rationales in place there. It's not just, oh, well, you know, I just blow like a dandelion leaf wherever I go. And one of the reasons why mood reading is so iniquitous is because it can lead someplace where Sean the Book Maniac has led already. Sean the Book Maniac is a figure on a hill. He is the greatest figure in this horrible land that mood reading can lead you to, which is mood quitting. Mood quitting books, bailing on books, is a direct exponent of simply always indulging in mood reading. That's the next item on Steve's agenda. So this business of not reading a book or not finishing a book because you're not in the mood, it was already working my one good nerve. But what were the books? Okay. I think it was Curtis who mentioned Middlemarch. I don't know what to tell you. I honestly don't know what to tell you. Middlemarch is one of the greatest novels ever written. And when I say that, I mean the only thing that you can actually mean by that, which is one of the most evolving novels ever written. I am never going to call a novel great because it looks great up on a shelf. I'm never going to call a novel great because it is a steely work of intellectual genius but doesn't affect you at all. No. No. If you hear that about a novel that is well-loved or that is canonical, distrust it. I've heard that said about The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, of all things. Good Lord. I hardly know a book more effective, more urgently effective than The Magic Mountain. Middlemarch is the same way. I know that on the surface it can look like a very long, very stodgy, ultra-British, village novel. But it is so much more than that. I'm not saying that George Eliot's hands aren't completely clean when it comes to this, because, boy oh boy, could she write a boring book when she wanted to. But Middlemarch, again, dispense with mood, okay? Dispense with mood. You're not 2 years old. You're throwing your stewed peas across the room because you're not in the mood to eat them. You could make yourself start Middlemarch. It wouldn't kill you. Anyway, what were the other books? 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade. I think it was Conor who brought it up. And of course, because he's British, he said the Marquis of Sade. when you cross the pond into France, it's the Marquis de Sade. And his stuff is worthless. I don't understand why. Well, actually, I do understand why it's been elevated, why it's taught in some schools. Because when you adhere, when you spend all of your time with Dude Bro Lit, that's the Marquis de Sade is exciting, to use a loaded term when it comes to him, a totally different part of your brain than Middlemarch. It's not just that they're different kinds of books, it's that it's a different process that you're doing to turn the pages and take in the words in them. And one is worthwhile process and one is not. And when you sink yourself into Dude Bro Lit like that, and it's all that you do, on some level that you are eating, that you are living day to day, 3 meals a day after day after day, on the icing of a cake. You're never having the cake itself, you're never having any vegetables, you're never having any stew or anything like that. You're living day to day on the icing of the cake. When you do that, there's a part of you that feels guilty. There's a part of you that knows you're doing that. Same thing with people who overindulge in YA. And the same response that they have when the whole process is well along the way, when their teeth are rotting out of their mental heads. Usually what people will do is then try to legitimize that thing they've been doing. But you can't legitimize a totally fraudulent, absolute lack of lapse of personal discipline. The only thing you can do with that is either continue with it or correct it. You can't legitimize it, turn around and say, well, I know, a part of me has always known that this is a shameless, lazy way for me to go about my reading life. But now, rather than, I've been doing it so long, now I don't even want to admit that anymore. Instead, I want to teach this in class. I want to legitimize it. I want to write a serious scholarly paper on Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And that is why the Marquis de Sade is studied, because it's just an older version of that. People saying, well, I don't like reading Balzac, but I do like reading this. I'm not going to pay any attention when you remind me of the reasons why I like it. Instead, I want to study it now. I literally want to make it legitimate. No, it's not. But what was the other one? Oh, Tessa Moshfegh. Okay, the less said, the better. Junk. But let's move on here. Huge books. They both had to nominate a huge book on their TBR. And Curtis, unwittingly, played directly into something that I've been talking about on this channel a few times recently. He mentioned David Stevenson's book, 1914 to 1918. A big volume of his on the First World War, obviously. And Curtis mentioned that he liked what he read, but that it felt incredibly dense, that he would get a few pages in and be mentally exhausted and need to put it down for a bit. And that plays right into something, that underscores something that I've been saying on this channel a few times, which is that there are levels in reading. Nobody likes to say that. Everybody likes to think of reading as completely egalitarian, and I think that partially informs why YA became so maniacally popular. But in reality, there are levels to reading, just like there are levels to running. Right? I mean, you don't run at all, or you run around a track at the gym very slowly, or you run around your neighborhood and you do 3 miles, and then you do 5 miles, and then you do 5 miles 5 times a week, and then there's running in Olympic contests and marathons. No one in the physical realm, no one would ever look at those and say, well, I am a 2-legged person, I am able-bodied, so I know how to run. So all running is equal. No one would do that. But when it comes to reading, okay, I am an adult. I know how to read. So all reading is equal. No, no, it's not. No, it's not. Not only are not all readers equal, but not all reading is equal either. And the problem with Stevenson, it's not a problem. He's a terrific historian. I think Curtis could probably tell that just in his limited exposure to what is so far this author's masterpiece. It's that he's not writing for you at the beginning. The way to make that massive accumulation of facts on the page faster reading is for you to already know a large number of those facts, and not just to memorize them for a quiz, but know them as a subject. And Stevenson is not writing beginner's World War I history. And there are authors who do that, and they do a really good job. So the problem isn't with the book here, it's with the reader. It's that Curtis hasn't read enough World War I history to read Stevenson and appreciate him. Nothing wrong with that at all. I would use it as a strong encouragement to go out if it interests you, the subject interests you. I guarantee you beyond a shadow of a doubt that if you trace Curtis's family back and Conor's family back, you will find people who fought in World War I. If the subject interests you, find introductions that are more suited than Stevenson and keep him for when you no longer need them, when you've progressed beyond that. And then Conor mentioned And Quiet Flows the Dawn by Mikhail Sokolov. He held up an old Penguin translation. Sokolov has had, Quiet Flows the Dawn has had a much more recent translation, and Sokolov could really use it. He's an amazing writer. He is an amazing writer in the vein of Russian epic fiction, Russian panoramic epic fiction, that they do better than anybody. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they put in the water over there, but they do that better than anybody. And Sokolov's is an amazing recent example. Boy, oh boy, when I was reading that, I had that exact same Penguin edition that Conor had. And I read it, and even then, even when I was reading it decades ago, I was thinking, I don't think this translator is doing this justice. I think corners are being cut here. And then I read, I forget who did the modern translation. I think it was not Pevier and Volkonsky. I think it was somebody else. I know, it's almost a jailable offense. But it was huge. First of all, it was 3 times as big as the previous English translation. But it was so much better. I'll have to remember, I'll have to see if I can find that, maybe link it on Amazon or something like that. It was was one of those big, fat hardcover editions that I just always, when I see them, I always assume that the following year they will be a Penguin Classic, and this one I don't think ever was. But boy, oh boy, reading it again was an amazing experience. So it'll certainly qualify even more as a big book, but I don't know that if I were speaking directly to Conor, I would say probably don't go ahead with that translation. Why waste the effort? If you're going to cover the ground, and in your case probably only once, why not read the best possible translation? And they're night and day, the two that I read. I'll have to remember to leave the information below if I can find it. And then there was one thing was mentioned, a cover buy that had bad reviews. I think Curtis said that he doesn't do cover buys, and good for him. I wish that I were as strong, but I do cover buys when it comes to mass market science fiction and also mass market romances. I'd be willing to bet that neither Conor nor Curtis has ever read a mass market romance. Nothing like stodgy old fixed in your ways for people in their 20s. You'll never find it more than people in their 20s. But Conor mentioned a book with that was a cover buy that had bad reviews that actually doesn't have bad reviews. But it was Star Wars by George Lucas, the original book. Of course, I went to see Star Wars in the theaters, and I, went into the movie theater and saw people standing and sitting in the aisles, every seat full, people up in the proscenium, right, looking straight up at the screen. I watched it when it was originally that way, so of course I'm not going to call it A New Hope. I'm sorry, that wasn't its name. I'm not interested in entering into George Lucas's weird fever dream of continuity. It was called Star Wars. And George Lucas, with a little help, wrote the book. And in many cases, in most parts of America anyway, the book appeared in stores before the movie did. And the book is actually fairly good. And I believe has good reviews. As far as Star Wars novels goes, it's not bad at all. I didn't, as far as the cover buy thing goes, though, the cover that Conor held up, if you're going to read Star Wars by George Lucas, you want the cover to either be the original movie poster or the George and Greg Hildebrandt illustration that adapted the original movie poster, but not the thing that he held up. But one way or another, it's interesting to read. If you're a Star Wars fan, I don't think there are any left, but if you're a Star Wars fan and you haven't read that original George Lucas book, you really should. The Journal of the Wills. And then we had Most Intimidating on your TBR. And there were three things that came up. One was Conor mentioned John Updike and Willa Cather. And you live near charity shops, you live near used bookstores, take my advice, bag up your John Updike and take it in for credit. You're never going to read it if you're lucky, and if you force yourself to, you're going to hate it. It's not only crude and inept and sexist and racist, but it's also dated. There's nothing to it at all. There's no reason to read it. It's all of those negative things, and also, it's not canonical. John Updike is never going to be in the canon, so there's no point in doing it. So just bag it all up and bring it in for credit. Not so much true with Willa Cather. It's absolute heresy now in the literary world to call Willa Cather boring. So the most I will do is say that if you read O Pioneers or My Antonia, you probably read enough Willa Cather. Read one or two of those. I was going to say, read O Pioneers, and if it really grabs you, then you can move on and read My Antonia, but no one's ever crossed that hurdle. So just read O Pioneers and you'll be fine. But for Curtis, the book that came under the intimidating category was Paradise Lost by John Milton. And I wholeheartedly agree that on first blush, when you first encounter that, it is going to look intimidating. And unfortunately, unlike with other verse epics, part of that was intentional on Milton's part. This is very elevated. If you read the prose, or God help me, the doggerel verse of Milton's day, you will see that it's not anything like Paradise Lost. He was intentionally pitching a high Homeric note. But when you get used to that, when you get used to the poem's diction, it's amazing. It's amazingly good. Beautiful. Just amazingly beautiful. in addition to telling a fairly good narrative story, I mean, no matter where you stand on the spectrum of Christianity, it's incredible mythology. A war in heaven. That's just an amazing thing. Intimidating, yes, but not forbidding. It should invite you. And that was it. That was their intimidating TBR tag with only one bonus left in. Conor surprised Curtis at the end of their tag by saying, pick a book at random from my shelf, pull it down, and talk about it. I don't know, maybe Curtis isn't a do something at random type of guy. But he had a distinct deer in the headlights moment there. But then they pulled down the complete robot stories of Isaac Asimov. And what are you supposed to say about the complete robot stories of Isaac Asimov? They're pure gimmick. There's no writing talent. There's no beauty of expression. There's no deep depth of thought at all. And again, like with Willa Cather, this is complete heresy, but Asimov he's foundational for the genre of science fiction mainly because he got up every morning, went outside, pointed a buckshot rifle at the wall of a barn and just fired away all day long. And if you do that for a career of writing that spans 60 years, you're going to hit the barn plenty of times. But there's no actual talent in Asimov beyond just mere invention and prolific writing. You can't compare him and, for instance, even Ray Bradbury, somebody like Alfred Bester, somebody like that. You can't compare him like that, and the robot stories bring that out the worst. If you want, well, I mean, the Foundation books by Asimov are at least where he marries some deeper artistic commitment. I hate using those words because they're so foreign to him. They don't apply to him. But at least there's a grandness of vision, I guess you could say, in the Foundation books. None of the characters are believable. None of the spacefaring details are believable. I don't for a minute believe, for instance, that every planet has a specific smell. I think that's Asimov, who knows that at the time that he was in his 30s, every neighborhood of Brooklyn had its own specific smell. Absolutely, yes. But planets? I don't think so. But one way or another. The volume that he has on his shelf, the robot stories, is not worth the time if you haven't read Pride and Prejudice, if you haven't read Wolf Hall, if you haven't read Middlemarch. But anyway, that was my BookTube Parasite Tag, where you latch onto the content of some other booktuber and make fun of them. That was Sean's original intent. It's a little mean on Sean's part, but and of course Curtis lays himself wide open to that sort of thing. Since he, in his videos, he looks like he only just transformed back from the most mild-mannered and low-audio, softest, most courteous British werewolf that you could imagine. He's got the hair everywhere and he looks slightly exhausted. but that was my BookTube Parasite Tag, where my challenge was not so much to do the tag as it was to riff on all the books mentioned. So there we go. I think this video was supposed to be 4 hours long. I got it in under an hour. We'll have to leave it at that. But I've got plenty more bookish stuff to talk about, so I'll wrap this up, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.